from the heart of London's theatreland, it's Mr. Sidney Roundworld.
Thank you. Okay, calm down. Oh, what a lively bunch we've got in here tonight. And rightly so, as tonight is the Lardy Christmas Oddcast, and we're here with a live studio audience in the heart of London's theatreland, where very soon all will be revealed. So since we released our first Oddcast in October, we've had a flood of letters and questions coming in from all over the globe. So tonight, as we get ready for the festive season, it's time for me to unload my sack and deliver the contents to my guests tonight, the dynamic duo of Lard, Nick Skinner and Richard Clark. Gentlemen, welcome to this magnificent venue.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sidney. It certainly is opulent in the extreme.
Good evening, Sidney. What a wonderful venue you brought us to tonight, and may I say how sensational you are looking.
I must say, the Widow Twankey costume fits like a charm. It's magic.
And the reviews have been fantastic, Sidney. It's a triumph in yellow, they say.
It's quite special, isn't it? I think without further ado, I'm going to rummage through my sack in the best festive tradition. We've had a great response to the call for letters and questions. What I thought we'd do is keep to our usual format, but in each section we're going to answer letters or questions relevant to that area. And we're going to dive straight in with our What's in the Workshop mailbag. So the first letter is from Kirk in New Zealand. Ooh. Kirk says he really enjoys seeing the building projects Richard's been undertaking on Lard Island News, but so far he's not taken the leap into building his own terrain. So Rich, Kirk wants to know what tools and materials are essential if he's going to start building his own terrain, and wonders if you could recommend a good starter project for him.
Okay. Two big questions really. I'll start with the sort of key ingredients that you want in your kitchen cupboard of building bits, if you like. The first thing for me is sharp sand. Sharp sand is a sort of gritty sand, and the reason I like it is it's good for all sorts of purposes. If you want a fine sand, you can sieve it and just use the fine stuff. If you want rocks and boulders, you can sieve it and keep the rocks and bouldery bits that are in it. And if you want a mixture, you can use it just as it is. And that is great for creating just any texture for earth, ground, mountains, hills, things like that. That is a really cheap must-have. A sack of that, a little plastic sack of that, you can get for less than £1.50, about £1.25 in your local DIY builders merchants type thing, and that is an absolute essential. What I tend to do is keep it in a box, and so it dries out. The next thing is PVA glue. You can buy this from any art shop. Don't. Buy it from a builder's merchants. Builders use PVA glue for an awful lot of things, the primary one being sealing surfaces before they plaster them. So they use a very, very large amount of this stuff, painting it, slapping it all over walls. What you can do is get a big 3 litre, like a jerry can, plastic jerry can full, which if you buy in a builder's merchants will cost you about the same as it would to buy a little tub in a craft shop. That stuff is useful for just about anything and everything. Yeah. I use it to paint onto a surface and then sprinkle my sharp sand on there to get a ground. Once that's dry, I paint over the top to solidify it. The whole thing sets like concrete, but it's the PVA glue that really holds everything together. The next thing is a big tub of bitter chocolate paint. There's many brands that you can use because this is an external quality paint. Now the paint that you can get, something like Sandtex, you don't need to buy a top brand. I tend to use the DIY shop's own brand version of that. But the bitter chocolate comes out sort of dog poo brown, and really you can use as an undercoat. I use it for anything. If I'm painting buildings, if I'm painting the ground, if I'm painting trees, it is the starting point for everything. Then you need some materials. 3mm MDF. If you can get 2mm, you're lucky. I don't seem to be able to get that. I like 2mm MDF because it's nice and thin. On the other hand, 3mm doesn't warp quite as easily, so it's a pretty good compromise. And I use that for basing most things. Artist mounting board. Artist mounting board is a heavy-duty cardboard that they use when mounting pictures in frames. That tends to come in, I think it's about 2.5–3 millimeters in thickness, and you get that in sheets of about 3 foot by 2 foot. It is really good stuff for heavy duty cardboard builds. So if I'm making a fort, for example, I will use a heavy duty polystyrene, a blue polystyrene, which is mainly for building insulation works, but I buy mine from a model company. But the things like if I'm building a gateway on that, I will cut the main basis for that gateway out of artist mounting board because it's pretty solid stuff. On top of that, I'll use a lighter weight of card to do the planking on that gate and to put things on like hinges. But for that, I just use a cornflake packet, so I don't even bother keeping that in stock. If I want to use it, I'll just go in the kitchen cupboard and cut a bit off the cornflake packet. I'm sure my wife must think we have some fairly unusual mice who are cutting rectangles out of the cornflake packet.
Very neat.
Yeah, but they are the key things that I think you want. As I say, I use high density polystyrene for building a lot of things. But those things, having them in stock, that will allow you to do an awful lot of the basic things. I think what's important for me is that I am not a model maker by any stretch of the imagination, but these are all pretty basic things that anybody's going to need in stock if they're doing anything.
What do you use to cut your MDF? And do you use the same tool on the polystyrene?
That's a really good question. I think it's important to remember that MDF is horrible material to work with. I use a fine tooth saw, which you use for fine carpentry work where potentially it's going to be on display. Again, they're disposable these days and you can buy them pretty cheaply, but the important thing to remember is that MDF is an inert material. If you get it in your lungs, it is just going to sit there. It's not going to degrade like normal wood shavings would. So you really want to be wearing a breathing apparatus. And by that, I'm not talking about undersea Jacques Cousteau type stuff. I'm talking about just wearing a mask that's going to keep you safe. So that is really important. The important thing is you don't really need an awful lot of very clever tools to do this type of stuff. I mean, if I'm cutting the high density polystyrene, I tend to use a bread knife. If I'm cutting anything relatively thin, I just use a pair of kitchen scissors. Yeah. There's nothing tremendously clever here. I think as regards a good starter project, I'd say, well, don't try building anything completely brand new. There's no point if it's your first job on a building site. You don't start with the Atlantic wall. You probably want to replace a window in a shed. So in this case, just take something. There are companies out there like War Bases who produce some really good basic models in MDF, which you can then tart up and add your own individuality to it. Take one of those buildings and just put some shutters on. But cut out your rectangular shape out of artist mounting board, and then cut up 3 or 4 little thin planks of wood to represent the the planks on the shuttering, and stick them on. A couple of small bits of cardboard to represent the hinges. Just adding that to a building gives it a completely different look. Just cut out a big rectangle on the side and use that as an advertising hoarding. Go online, take a picture of a vintage advertising poster, download that and put it onto a piece of paper and print it out, cut that out and stick that on there. You've got a building that suddenly becomes very, very personalised and very different to anything that anybody else has. So that would be my initial starting point. Start on some small projects to get your confidence going, and then you'll find yourself looking at MDF models particularly in a different light, or any models really. You know, you can take a resin model and think, hey, I'm going to put some shutters on that, or I really fancy building a bit of a lean-to out of artist mounting board, which I'll then plank up with cardboard, and that will look different. Then use your 3mm to put a base on and start adding a garden. If I'm going to put a little garden area, I just use a hot glue gun to create some raised areas. Just put down 5 or 6 little lines about 2 inches long, so it looks like somebody's ploughed that ground, and then on the top of those furrows just use some flock or little sort of foliage type material to make it look like you've got a row of carrots growing, or a little line of you know, whatever plants, and just adding little bits of detail like that, combining that with things like commercially available fencing or hedges, allows you to create something that's totally different. Nobody else on the planet has got that, and it's got your stamp on it, and it's going to look different. It's going to look really good. So start small, get your confidence, and then the world's your oyster.
That's absolutely great, Rich. And that leads us on to another question which was asked by Colin in South Wales, who wants to know if we've ever used terrain pieces which are not specifically designed for wargaming, and if so, where have we picked those up? Is that something you've done, Nick?
Yeah, all the time actually. What I find actually is, if you look inside the hobby, although there's a great deal of stuff there, some of it's quite pricey, and sometimes things can fall under your eye in an alternative location, if you like, that you can just pick up and think, hang on a minute, that's handy, I can use that for something else. So a good example of that for me would be some of the ships that we've got for the 28mm Napoleonics naval stuff that we do. There's quite a good range of ships around at the moment. Actually, you can pick them up from Ainsty and Blood and Plunder, for instance, do some nice ships, very nice ships, in fact. But that wasn't always the case, and so I think the first ship that I made actually was a bathroom ornament. It was one of these things that you might find on your auntie's windowsill. You know, if you went up to visit her in Grimsby, and she got a rowing boat on the windowsill. And I looked at the rowing boat and I thought, hang on a minute, that might be a rowing boat for somebody who's in 1/6 scale, but for somebody who's in 1/50 scale, that's the outline of a nice little revenue cutter. You can put a mast in there and you can turn it into something really good. Drill a hole in the side for some gun ports, and you're away.
So you stole that from an old lady, is that what you're telling us live?
Yeah. If Inspector Knacker can just hold off the handcuffs for 10 minutes while we finish the podcast, that would be good. But anything like this, so I've looked on inspiration. Kids' toys are great. I've used some Lego canoes, for instance, in the past for stuff. So you can, inspiration comes from all kinds of places. For me, one of the places I like to hang out is model railway shows, because they're really quite good for looking at what you can do with terrain. Because they have a different eye to the ones that a wargamer has. They're interested in different things, and they have suppliers there who also sell different stuff. So you get different kinds of box loads for wagons, etc., that you can then use from there as well. So look outside. Any visit to Dunelm Mill or any shopping trip these days can be a wargames outing. I picked up a throw in Dunelm Mill the other day, which was a green chenille throw, that after you've sprayed it with a bit of dark green and yellow and a bit of texture paint, suddenly becomes a 6x4 battle mat, and you pick that up for 20 quid instead of 75 quid. I love the 75 quid ones, don't get me wrong, but actually if I can get a 20 quid one, even better.
Fantastic. And once we've started our terrain collection, we're going to want to paint it, but we're also going to want to paint our figures, and it leads to a question which was raised by Andy in Lancashire about what paints we use. Probably different paints for figures to paints for terrain.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely not. That's an excellent point. I mean, I use Vallejo for most of my painting, but I certainly wouldn't use that on model buildings or any terrain really. That's why I mentioned about getting the bitter chocolate masonry paint, using that as a basis, then to paint up from that. I tend to use lots of levels of dry brushing for buildings, and I will tend to go with domestic paints, the stuff you use on your house. You don't need to buy the big tubs. You can go down and get a match pot, which is, I don't know, the size of half a pint of cream or whatever, you know, little tub, and you use that and dry brush up from there. That gives you great coverage, it gives you a lot of paint, and it gives you it cheap actually, because match pots tend to be cheap, because they think if they sell you that for £1, you're going to come back and buy 25 quid quid's worth of it because you want to paint your front room.
Yeah.
So in terms of coverage, it's a very cheap way to get hold of paint. Painting figures, Vallejo. I really like the Vallejo bottles. That allows me to dispense, in theory, to dispense the amount that I want onto my palette and go from there. However, I also use things like the Army Painter washes. They're fantastic, and I'm not talking about the dip ones, you know, the gloopy ones that you're meant to dunk your figure in and flick it. I'm talking about the water-based ones because they dry really quickly and they're nice to use. What I am finding myself going to more and more now are the Foundry the three paint system. I can't remember the name.
The triads.
I think some people call them triads. I think that might be another make. But I really like the idea of that. I mean, you, Sidney, have got a really good eye for colour. You take your base colour, apply that, and then mix up your own next level and highlight. I actually struggle. I tend to get that wrong. When I mix my own colours, it's either too dark, so you don't notice it, or it's too light as a highlight, so it looks ridiculous. It looks like they're wearing a sort of stripy outfit. So having somebody to do that for me and to pick my base coat, my highlight, and then my final top highlight makes life an awful lot easier. And they're really nice quality paints as well. I think they're nice. Yeah, so that's who I use. What about you, Nick? You use Vallejo?
Yeah, I do. I like Vallejo generally, and because the range is fantastic, and as you say, you know, they've got everything you need. But I also like the Citadel paints actually. The quality of that paint I like the richness of their. I think the richness of their rich colours is really remarkable, and the names are bonkers. You know, it's impossible to know what the colour is called. It's called, you know, puke green or something, and that's one of the more sensible ones. But the range is nice. The quality of the paints are good. They're a lot of money. That's the downside of those. But I like Vallejo. I like the washes. I use the Vallejo washes.
All right. I've never used the Vallejo washes because I've always gone with the Army Painter ones because I think they kind of hit the industry first, and I bought half a garage full of them because I was so impressed. So I haven't got through them. But the Vallejo Air, I have to mention. They produce some beautiful colours. Even if to paint on with a brush, the silver in the Vallejo Air range is just beautiful. When you apply it, it just looks like metal. It really is fantastic.
Well, that's some great advice there. I hope that's useful, Andy. What we're going to do next is look into the mailbag at some of the bigger issues that people have asked about. So the first of our big issues for this festive show is from Randy in Edmonton, which is the one in Canada, who says he was really interested by the comments that we had in Oddcast 2.5 from Crisis in Antwerp, where we were discussing the importance of smaller businesses in the hobby. And Randy asks whether we think there's a real change which is taking place from the hobby being essentially a cottage industry to being a bigger industry, and whether there are advantages and disadvantages in that transition, if indeed it's taking place. Now, Rich, I know this is something that you and me and Nick have talked about several times, so let's get your thoughts on that.
Okay, I think this is an issue for me which reminds me very much, which is a microcosm of your average high street in any town in Britain and presumably elsewhere, is that 25 years ago, and I'll give you an example, a very local example, 25 years ago in St Albans, if you walked up St Peter Street, which is our main high street, there were 4 butchers on there, all of which were producing, you know, some very high quality meat, and you could go along and you could select what you want. And if you wanted to get game, you could get game, and if you wanted to get something a little bit out of the ordinary, you could get that there, as well as your everyday pound of mince. Now, and this is a small city of 80,000 people, there is not one butcher in the whole of St Albans. All there are supermarkets, and we've seen a situation where if you now want to get something a little bit exotic, if you want to get something unusual, you can't get it. And that means that what we're able to get from the 3, 4, 5 supermarkets is very much a duplication of exactly what the other supermarkets are doing. You get your pound of mince, you can get your packet of chicken breasts, you can get your packet of pork chops, and that's it. And that really concerns me in the hobby, that what we are potentially in danger of accidentally doing is allowing ourselves as gamers to simply look at what the big supermarket type organisations have got to offer. and not take into account what some of the smaller companies have got. And I see this as being a real issue with Wargames magazines in the hobby. And I'm not saying that of all magazines, but I certainly feel that in magazines there is a tendency to look only at what they perceive to be the big games, the big figure lines, the big producers, which is great because there are some really fantastic products produced by big companies. However, what I would hate to see happen is that the wargaming metaphorical high street saw all of the smaller businesses disappear who were producing some of that tremendously interested, varied and really high quality products, and just be replaced entirely by big corporate conglomerates who are mass producing bog standard stuff. My feeling is that at the moment we're in a fantastic place. We've got access to both. But looking forward, I just have concerns that we as gamers need to be aware that whatever is in the wargaming press, there are other companies out there as well who are producing some really high quality stuff. And one of the things I've always attempted to do with Lard Island News is not just to go on there and say, hey, look at Chain of Command, they're great, hey, look at Sharp Practice, they're great, but to talk about other people's products as well. And to try and highlight, especially when you see new businesses coming through. I mean, 3 years ago, I came across a company on eBay called Charlie Foxtrot Models, and I saw that what they were doing with MDF buildings was really exciting and innovative because they were doing something a little bit different. Now, I made a point then of buying one of these models, writing a review of it, doing a step-by-step build process and saying what I thought. And it's my hope that, it was my hope at the time, that it would give those guys some publicity to help their business grow. And it's great to see that when I talk to Colin at Charlie Foxtrot now, it has really gone from being a guy who was making stuff in his garden shed and flogging it on eBay to being a full-time business and really producing some of the most innovative and cutting-edge stuff that is out there. And it's small companies who are more inclined to be innovative than big companies, because that's just the nature of the beast. You look at big companies out there and they're producing products that are entirely inoffensive and very good, but they're not really inclined to push the boundaries, because if you are going to buy plastic, if you're going to produce plastic figures, you have to know that you're going to sell them in huge numbers to make that worthwhile. So you're never going to do the Venezuelan war of, you know, XYZ, because it's simply not going to be there in sufficient quantity, whereas it's the small companies who are prepared to take on projects like that, and that's why we need to nurture them, help them grow, and even help them remain at the level they're at. Nick?
Well, I think that the thing that gives me confidence is the fact that we have the internet, and the butchers in the 1980s didn't have the ability to support their businesses online. So I think the internet is a great place where big businesses and small businesses can both hang out together. I think that, to push back a little bit against you, I think the big businesses do some great stuff, because what they do is they enable a range of products to be produced that actually enables a spin-off around them. They create a gravity around their product that actually other people can work off. So look at Flames of War and the massive range that Battlefront produced to go with there. You know, you can get tanks in 15mm with that range that were never previously available.
Yeah.
And you could argue the same with Bolt Action and with Wardlaw games in terms of what's happening there with the ranges that they produce. You can more and more tanks coming through their product catalogue. You can look online, you can get what you're after, and what that drives, what that builds, is the ability of other companies around the edge to produce other stuff that goes with that. That, as you say, the big guys wouldn't produce because it's not commercially viable. I think my sense of it is also about the decision making that's made on that commercial level. So I'm guessing that companies like Warlord, you know, their decisions are entirely commercially based. They're only going to sell the products that are going to have a good return on their investment to get that out there to market.
Quite right. So they're a limited company who are out there looking.
I agree, and I don't question that at all. But I think one of the outcomes of that, therefore, is that the things that don't get the return don't get the investment. Whereas, you know, if it's your hobby and your love, you make the investment, you sculpt that range that you've always wanted to sculpt, and you put it out there. And that, I think, has got to be supported. I think this is where the shows are massively important. We said it before, shows are great because they've got the big companies there, but it's the shows really where the small companies are able to show their wares and and get you to make that impulse buy.
I think that's absolutely right. It's about it's about having a balance, and that's what I'm saying. It's great to have a high street where there are the big companies and the small coexisting and doing what they do best.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. The guy who's going to be doing the Venezuelan war or whatever is the guy who's probably from Venezuela and who's probably really enthusiastic about that. But I would hate to see a situation where accidentally we ignored what he was doing because we were simply focusing on the supermarket approach.
I think it's a question of taking the best from both, isn't it? Really?
Yeah,
I mean,
precisely.
The thing about the large manufacturers is that they have complete ranges which they've been able to build over time, and they've often been able to add on additional ranges. So you can go and you can start your collection, British Napoleonics from Warlord, or
Perry's
or one of the big manufacturers like that. And I think then you look around, at least I do, at some of the smaller manufacturers to fill in the niches. And I'm always prepared with a smaller manufacturer to take something which maybe isn't a finished range. Maybe the figures actually might not be perhaps as polished or as finely sort of cast, or you're prepared to accept a little bit which just is slightly quirky about a smaller manufacturer, because that, if it's meeting a niche and it's producing figures that can just slot into an existing range, or if it's perhaps a period in time which isn't going to be a hugely popular period with lots and lots of people wanting to do it, you really want the smaller manufacturers to be doing those things. So I think it's then a great opportunity to support those manufacturers. I think when it starts to become quite difficult sometimes is when the large manufacturers want to augment whatever they've got and they start buying up the smaller ranges.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some good reasons for that, and it's great to be able to sort of have a big range of Landsknechts coming from different manufacturers, all under one manufacturer. But it also is difficult because then, to what extent is that going to be added to in an existing range which a smaller manufacturer might have done? So that sort of purchasing up the ranges, I think that's something that we're seeing quite a bit in the industry. At the moment, I think that's probably the way the future's going to go, but I certainly hope that going forward, things like 3D printing make it easier for people who want to have a go in their garden shed or in their back room, the really small micro producers, to continue taking that chance, to continue putting out product that really interests them and that people support it. So that's the way it's always been in the hobby.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think that's been a really useful question, so thanks very much for that, Randy. Also, still talking about products, we've got both Ed Leland from Richmond in Virginia and Jesper Lindquist in Denmark. They've both asked us if we can have reviews of products from other companies on the Oddcast. I think, Nick, you and me have talked about that before, and I don't think that's a problem for us, is it?
No, I absolutely welcome it. I think it'd be great to talk about other things. We're in a broad hobby, and we want to have everything that we can within our umbrella to discuss, if you like. And I think the more we can talk about those things and bring them in, the better. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, as we've already touched on, it's something I've always tried to do with Lard Island News, and it's certainly when we're talking about what's on the workbench here, it's certainly something we're going to be doing. So the answer to that, guys, is yeah, absolutely. That's we're not just here to blather on about ourselves. We want to be talking about the hobby as a whole, because ultimately we're here because it's our hobby.
Yeah, we only make rules. If we only spoke about rules, where would we go?
Well, where would we go indeed? But that is actually exactly where we're going to go, because Jesper also added in a follow-up question all about rules, and in particular about FAQs and erratas. And Jesper was keen to know if we could discuss some of those issues on the Oddcasts, and talking through what goes into a good FAQ, what does make it into an errata. And I think Jesper's question was really about the differences between erratas correcting things and erratas actually being used to amplify some of the points that perhaps when rules have been written there wasn't the space to flesh that out. That's very much in your department, Rich.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly it's true that erratas do one thing. They tell you what you need to add to the existing set of rules. However, they do that in two ways. Either A, they are a real errata, which means, oh dear, I buggered that up and got it wrong, and therefore you've got to change this because it was wrong in the first instance. Or it may be that you've got to add to that, because people have come, and people do this all the time, they say, hey look, can we have a little bit more information here? Can you quantify this? So for example, in Chain of Command the rule was always, well, there's a limit to how many hand grenades that you can throw in a phase of play, which is determined by the level of the leader who's with them. And some people said, look Rich, we understand this, but we feel that maybe that might be too many. Can you give us a guideline for how many should be the basic number of hand grenades each squad can have? So people have asked for that, so I provide it. Now that isn't an error, that's not an error, but it's something that people have asked for, and I think it's important with any set of rules to be responsive to what people are asking for. Equally then, FAQs, well, FAQs are a really interesting thing, because FAQs, frequently asked questions, are a way for us to develop on what we intended when we wrote a particular rule in a certain way. What we have found and what we've discovered, and I think this is the case with all rules, and I obviously talk to a lot of guys who write rules for a living, and we all agree on one thing, is that about 50% of people will pick up a set of rules and they will read it and fully understand it, and about 25% will read it and they'll think, yeah, I've got a pretty good idea of that, but I've got a few questions, and about 25% of people will say, I need some help with this. That's not because the rules are written badly, it's just because our brains all work in slightly different ways. People process information in slightly different ways. Some people like to see a game played out on a film, and that's something that we're going to be trying to do a lot more of. Some people like to have the game introduced to them by a friend so they can play it through and then they can read the rules and go, hey, now I know what that means. Some people like to ask questions and figure it out for themselves. So our approach to FAQs has always been, look, some of these, when we did, best way to sum it up, when we did the Sharp Practice FAQ, we did about 20 pages, and some people said, blimey, you've been a bit generous because some of those questions are quite clearly in the rules, or some of those questions are crazy. I said, yeah, you may think they're quite clear, but you're in the 50% that get the way it's been written. Some of these people aren't. So I think, to be fair to our customers, the way to do it is to provide a comprehensive FAQ. If that question has been asked, it means that somebody out there needs a bit of help understanding what that means. So I like to make the FAQ as comprehensive as possible. So if that means it's 20 pages, well, at least that should help people who are playing their way through the first game, second game, and want to get a point clarified. So I think providing a good comprehensive FAQ is an important part of my job as a game designer, because really all I want people to do is have fun playing the game, and if I can do anything to make that easier, that's what we will do. So we can certainly talk about FAQ, talk through issues that we've included in there in future shows. If that's what people want, we can take particular rules and talk them through, Nick.
Well, I think the feedback we've had also from people is that they love the videos, and you mentioned those. Yeah. And I think that FAQs, the need diminishes for FAQs if people can see the system played through and watch it on film. So we know, for instance, that the Chain of Command videos and the Sharp Practice videos we've done have been well received. People want more of those, and particularly we know of more recently is the release of the videos that you shot with the guys from Beasts of War.
Yeah.
So with Beasts of War there is a Chain of Command playthrough game, which is an hour video, about an hour long.
2 hours.
People can see you getting thoroughly whipped.
Yeah.
And in oh, was that a bit of a spoiler there?
No.
And
it's more of a continuing theme than a spoiler.
And then the other game is a Sharp Practice walkthrough. Where people can see, again, it's about an hour long, I think, they're putting more on that. So I think they're really powerful. I think they over time will diminish the need for FAQs.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And certainly, I mean, we've got quite a few videos online, how to play Sharp Practice, how to play Chain of Command, and even a sort of fledgling series for Dutch Britannia. And when we started making them, you may recall, YouTube used to have a limit on videos, about 15 minutes. So you could only put 15-minute clips on. So when we made those earlier films, we had to dice it up into 15 or 20-minute segments.
Yeah, that's right.
Now that time limit has been lifted, so we can actually go out there and make, you know, full War and Peace type. I'm not
sure that's a good thing or not.
And I'm not sure whether it's good or not. But we can certainly go out there and make more of them and make them more overarching in as much as you will be able to show a game being played through, rather than just focusing on this is how firing works and then the next video this is how movement works. So yeah, you're right, it's a great opportunity to watch and learn.
And I like the fact, Rich, that you mentioned about talking through particular rules, because that neatly leads on to a question raised by friend of the show, Ben Fine in New South Wales down in Australia, who's very interested to hear about the tactical mechanism in chain of command. What was you thinking, Richard, behind the idea of troops going tactical? Perhaps you could tell everyone what that concept is and how you came to that idea.
Okay, well, really, Chain of Command is obviously a skirmish level game, and the smallest unit you're going to have in there is a team. Might be 2 men, might be 3 men, might be 4 men. So it's, you know, small level action. Going tactical is really a way of allowing for the fact that our war games tables are flat, whereas in reality the Earth is not flat. For allowing for the fact that so many war games tables, when they have a village, it's a collection of buildings, whereas in reality when you go through a village it's a collection of buildings, but it's also a collection of any amount of other old rubbish, people's old bicycles, the dustbins are being left out, the builders delivered a pile of sand or a pile of bricks. And when you move through the real world, if you take your time and advance in a slightly slower manner, you can take advantage of that cover that's provided in that as you work your way through that village. Yeah. You can take advantage of those folds in the ground as you move across what would appear to be, if you purely looked at it on Google Earth, as a big flat field. In reality it's got folds in the grounds which troops can take advantage of. So the idea of allowing troops to sacrifice speed of movement for some degree of safety was simply an exploration of the fact that the Earth ain't really as flat as a war games table, and it's a mechanism that I think is important, and it works in a game which is about fire and movement. You know, you are looking to manoeuvre in chain of command, and you really have to manoeuvre in order to win. And one of the ways of doing that is by doing that in a slow and professional, methodical manner, taking advantage of the terrain. So that's why we put that in there, Ben.
And it's a rule which really fits well in a skirmish game. I don't think it would fit quite as well in a battalion.
It wouldn't fit at all. It would be totally and utterly ridiculous. I mean, it's if the smallest unit on the table is a platoon, you're getting to the point where it might be slightly ridiculous, because some of the men would be operating like that, but some wouldn't. But when you're looking at a small level skirmish game, I think it's absolutely important. And
sticking with skirmish games, let's think about scenarios, because we had a great question from Richard Nako in New South Wales.
Another Aussie.
Who asked, what's the best scenario to use to introduce a newcomer to Chain of Command? What scenario would you use, with what armies, what sized support points, and playing which role? So that's really a question, I think, to both of you.
Yeah, Nicholas.
Well, yeah. So I would say you're starting with the role as probably being the platoon leader, and just working through a platoon level game with light supports. And when I say light supports, that might not even mean armour.
Yeah.
It might, it might be that you've got something very light armour, like an armoured car in support. But really, as a first game, nice to get the full exploration of some of the smaller support options, like how adjutants work and barricades, even things like how you use team support weapons like mortars to get those in there. So I would start with a game that's... We spoke about Northwest Europe being a fantastic place to start some of these games. Most gamers seem to focus on that as being their preferred area of operation, if you like. Something small around a Normandy farm would be nice.
So yeah, I think terrain's important. I think if you want to get somebody to really enjoy a game, make your table as pretty as possible. Then almost doesn't matter what the game experience is like, because we all tend to feast with our eyes upon the most beautiful of war games terrain. But yeah, I think it's really important. I think one of the key issues in Chain of Command is that armour is tanks are not the be all and end all. They are not the huge, fiery, all-consuming dragon. I had a conversation with a guy on Facebook a couple of weeks ago who said to me, I've only played Chain of Command once, I think it was, and he said, I absolutely hated it because my opponent was able to select a tank as a support option and I didn't have enough points to do that, so the game was kind of over. And I thought, well, you know, no. Because one of the things that Chain of Command is really about is that it is at really close quarters. This is down and dirty. This is the point where tanks are there to support infantry, but the tanks also need the infantry to support them.
Absolutely.
I mean, if Nick had a Sherman as his support option and I had a Panzerschreck, I would feel pretty confident in that situation. So yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I don't know in terms of scenarios. What I tried to do with the 6 scenarios in the rulebook is make them all good. I suppose, keeping it simple, the patrol action's a good one, because really that's just about trying to defeat your enemy's, you know, drive down your enemy's false morale, which is a real key factor in the game. It's not about killing all your opponents, it's about defeating and overcoming their will to continue fighting. So that's why it's the first action in the book, because it's a good introduction. Keep it down, maybe 6 support points for 4 support points for each side. Keeps it nice and simple. Means you might get that universal carrier, or you might get, you know, that heavy machine gun, but you ain't going to be, nobody's turning up in a King Tiger and dominating the whole table.
I think on the scenario ideas, we have the pint-sized campaigns, of course, and we know that they're popular and they offer a running sequence of actions. But actually, if you just want a one-off game, it's worth looking in the specials. So, of course, we have the Christmas special, which is either out already or imminent, depending on exactly when this goes to air. So the Christmas special will include some Chain of Command scenarios in there, and the summer specials from the past as well will also include them. So look into old specials. Often they're historical encounters that people have written up and turned into a nice starter scenario, and they're a nice standalone place to start.
Yeah, good idea.
Excellent. So I hope that's useful, Richard. Let us know in the future how you get on. And talking about the future, it's almost Christmas, so we should look to the future. It's only just begun, because we've had some letters asking us to do that very same thing. In particular, future rule sets. So Brian Berger in Canada has asked us, when will In the Buff be published? And Nick in Bury St Edmunds has asked us, what's happening with fighting season? Is it ever going to happen? So with those two in mind, I think I've got to look at Richard and ask the question, what is happening with In the Buff and fighting season? And indeed, what are In the Buff and fighting season, gentlemen?
In the Buff, English Civil War, fighting season, modern combat in Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban, whatever you want to call them. Both of those rules are at a point where they were in development, and they reached a point where we'd invested an awful lot of time and effort into them, especially fighting season, huge amount of time and effort into them. But with both of those, we just simply hit issues which meant that I wasn't ready to carry on and complete them at that point in time. I think one of the things that I really need to stress about rule design is that it's not a mechanical process. You can't get up in the morning and go, right, I'm going to write a set of rules for the Renaissance period. You have to wake up in the morning and think, Renaissance, I really fancy looking at that. And then you start doing your research, and then you make a decision whether you want to do it. And then once you've decided you want to do it, you've got to go out there and buy the figures and paint the figures. And you've got to have that inspiration. You've been bitten by the bug. Otherwise, if you haven't, it's futile going out there and trying to write a set of rules. And when you are writing a set of rules, sometimes you hit an issue that you simply cannot get over. Charlie Don't Surf was the first set of rules Nick and I started working on together. It took 10 years before they finally were published, because we just, on a number of occasions, simply hit issues that we couldn't find a way around. And the only way to deal with that, well, you bang your head against a wall, and you bang your head against a wall, and you keep trying banging your head against a wall, and in the end you realise that the wall is going to win. And so what you do is you put the project back in a box and you put it back on a shelf, and then one day, at some point in the future, you get bitten by the bug again. And that's when you take it off the shelf and open the box. And to try and force yourself to do that simply doesn't work. So the honest answer, and it's not going to be an answer people want, is the honest answer is, I don't know. And I'm not willfully not finishing them just to annoy people. I'm doing it because I'm waiting for that inspiration to come back to me and for me to want to do it. I mean, I think and feel very fondly about those 2 sets of rules, and I'm very keen to see them both completed one day. But as to when that will be, well, it has to be the right moment, or the enthusiasm, which is what I think makes our rules successful, won't be there.
And that inspiration needs to come from other things sometimes. So as you say, if you're banging your head repeatedly on the wall, you bang your own head on it, and then you get some other people into playtest it, you bang their heads on it.
Yeah.
And actually, you just need to, everybody step away from it. Play something different, because playing something different will make you think about different mechanisms, and then that will light a fire in your head that you can then say, maybe I can use this over there.
Yeah, yeah.
And so by playing something else, you can crack another issue. And that's happened to us a number of times in the past.
Yeah.
And maybe on these it will be the same. Personally, within the buff, I struggle with it. And I think probably Richard's carried this significantly on his own, because in the buff is not, English Civil War is not really something that lights my fire. Maybe something will happen in the next 6 months to make that change. But well, it'd be nice to get them out there, and for sure. And what we've done with Fighting Season, the playtest we had with that was really very positive. So it'd be nice to get them out.
Oh yeah, I mean, we invested a year of time and effort in that, and frankly, imagine investing, in anybody in any job. If they did their job for a year and at the end of it the result was pretty much zero, what would their boss say to them? And that's exactly how we feel about that, because we put that time and effort into it, and it hasn't come to fruition. So it's definitely something we want to take through, but it's got to happen in its own time.
So there you go, Nick, and also to Brian, that we need some inspiration. But inspiration, maybe of a different kind, was on offer, and as mentioned by Jim McCabe in Glasgow in his email to us, who was intrigued in our Lardy road trip Oddcast by our description of a large naked giant spotted by the side of the road in Belgium. Jim asks, did you get a picture? So, Nick, Richard, what can we say to Jim?
Richard, you were driving. Why didn't you get a picture of him?
Well, fortunately I was driving, so I had to keep both hands on the wheel. But I certainly wouldn't have put my hands anywhere near any part of that giant character.
Nick, were your hands occupied similarly?
Well, my hands were on the dictaphone at that time, as they say. And there's something quite surreal when you're going along in the fast lane and all of a sudden a 40-foot fat bloke appears next to you with a 15-foot todger. The camera wasn't the first thing I was reaching for. The sick bag would have been a better thing.
So I think to answer Jim's question, we did not actually get a picture. But Jim, if you come across a picture, you probably best off keeping that to yourself, I think.
Well, I would love to know what that thing is. So somewhere on the motorway between wherever it was that we were and wherever it was we were going.
We were going from Ypres to Antwerp.
From Ypres to Antwerp, somewhere on that main road.
Is a naked cyclops.
And
I'd say he's 40 to 50 foot tall. And that, I've no idea what that is in metres. Hopefully somebody in Belgium can understand proper measurements and will know what we mean.
Please tweet your photos to Sid.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for the great questions. We're going to take a quick break before we come back for some more festive fun. Welcome back. As we know, Christmas is on the horizon, and I was wondering what items you've seen out there, Rich and Nick, which you would like if you were to be writing your letter to Santa tonight. So I'm going to start with Nick. What's on your Christmas list, mate?
Dear Santa, please can I have some more time? I would love to have some time over Christmas to get some painting done. So as you know, I've got some smugglers on the workbench, and I want to get some time to do those. I also want to put some time into my Gurkhas for Italy. I'm doing some 28mm Gurkhas for Italy. I really want to get into that for Chain of Command, and I'd quite like to get into my US Marines for the Pacific as well, to do some Iwo Jima stuff. Now, I think that's a bit fanciful to think that I can get could get 3 of those done. Even one of them would be good over Christmas, but that's on my list of things to do.
Good luck opening your parcel of time.
My parcel of time. I'd like to, well, on a realistic level, I'd like some. Think about the smugglers. You know the guys. I don't know. Talking about small businesses, Outpost War Game Services do a really nice range of highwaymen, and they're probably one of the very few companies that do offer smugglers. So I need to get some more smugglers from them to make up some numbers. And I quite fancy the idea, totally different subject, I quite fancy the idea of the, who is it that makes the 28mm submarine? Is that Empress?
It's Empress, I
that?
think, isn't it?
I really quite fancy that as a toy, but I have no idea how we would use it in
the bath.
in games. So yeah, the submarine would be great. I'd love to unwrap a large submarine on Christmas morning.
Very good. Your wife might be disappointed it wasn't her present.
She might.
Right.
Moving to Rich.
Moving swiftly on.
What's on your Christmas list, mate?
Ah, well, mate. Things that I've been looking at with my little face pressed up against the window in the toy shop that is the internet. Empress Miniatures Volksgrenadiers. I have already bought a big pile of Warlord Games stuff to be converted or generally make Volksgrenadiers. I think they've got some section packs. I think one of them is Volksgrenadiers. I think one of them's something like the last levy in Berlin. One of them's like a load of scruffy Waffen-SS men in winter costumes or something like that. And I was going to get them together and make a real mix and match of those really lovely Warlord figures. But the Empress have now started to introduce their Volksgrenadier range. So I'm going to mix them in and get a fabulous army with loads of variety in there. And if Empress can come out and do some more Volksgrenadier support weapons, that is gonna be really nice, because I think it's kind of a period that's glossed over, really, that late war stuff. And Volksgrenadiers have really got an unusual unit structure to them. They're not like the Italians in as much as they're very organised in a very different way, but the Italians in the desert have got this really weird unit structure that is so great you just want to game with it because it's totally unusual. And Volksgrenadiers are the same, and the figures are Paul Hicks sculpts. Truly wonderful. I was really keen to get some of their late war Yanks, but my pal the traitor McKipper got there first and painted up his army, and I thought, well, there's no point in me buying that because I'm going to be playing with his late war Yanks. So I fancy getting some Volksgrenadiers. And what else? Well, North Star are producing some figures for a fantasy set of rules that they're working with Osprey on, which I think it's called Oathsworn. Really nice plastic figures. As you may well know...
Oh, they're plastic?
They are plastic. As you may well know, that international war games celebrity, man of the valleys, the Welsh wizard, Mike Hobbs, star of Stage Screen and Meeples and Miniatures, is working with us, along with Abe Deacon and Jim Ibbotson, on a set of fantasy rules which are set in a real Tolkien-y type world, which I've had some great fun working with them developing the background story, because I love Tolkien, and many years ago I had some fantastic fantasy armies which I lent to a mate of mine and never saw again. So I've kind of got to the point where...
Sorry about that.
Probably for the best, yeah. I've got to the point where I really fancy painting up some forces for the fantasy game these guys are developing. So the North Star ones look really good. I saw some of their dwarves. I'm just waiting for their orcs to come out, and I'd really like some of their human factions as well, because the world that we're looking at is kind of late medieval, early Renaissance, and that's the type of period that I hope they're going to be able to cover. So that's going to be great. And I've actually had a bit of a side bet on this, because I'm a bit worried about this rule about having to be good at Christmas in order to get gifts. So in order to sort of make sure I do have something in my stocking to open on Christmas morning, I've just ordered myself 200 quid's worth of Charlie Foxtrot buildings, which is a bit more than I intended to spend, but it's one of those things where you go on the website and you think, oh, they're good, oh, and so are they, and so are they, and so are they, and you end up spending a lot more than you ever intended to do. But at least I know that if Santa thinks I haven't been as good as I could be, I will have some of Charlie Foxtrot's fantastic buildings to open on Christmas morning. Some of them are from their Pantar range, which are going to be great for sharp practice in southern Europe. They're also going to be great for Italy, for Chain of Command, when you at last open your big packet of thyme and some paint your Gurkhas. I've also bought some. They do some really nice streams. I bought 6 foot of that. And I've also bought some more buildings for Russia, which is a big ongoing project for me at the moment. So that's what I would put on my list to Santa, but also with the caveat that I bought some myself anyway.
What about you, Sidney? What will Santa be bringing down your chimney on Christmas Eve?
A wig?
Well, apart from more costumes.
He's got quite a good one, you could borrow that.
Oh no, he hasn't.
I've got my eye on some of the Ebor miniatures French dragoons in 28mm for the late 17th century. I think that they look really nice. And actually reading through one of the supplements, one of the sharp practice supplements, Dawns and Departures, which I know we've talked about maybe on one of the other Oddcasts, the role of dragoons is really interesting. I mean, on the tabletop, they tend to be a bit slightly useless, really. You always tend to use them as kind of think about using them as cavalry, or even sort of pushing them ahead and seizing a bridge or something like that. But I've been reading a really good book, which somebody sent over to me from the States, really about how dragoons were used to collect taxes, to raise contributions, right throughout Flanders and the Low Countries by the French. And the French dragoon force was pretty significant, much, much larger than the Allied dragoons. And having the dragoons raising contributions, foraging really extensively over dozens and dozens of miles was, I thought, a really good idea, which fitted in with the Dawns and Departures type of small mini campaign.
That does sound brilliant.
And Ebor Miniatures makes some very nice looking Paul Hicks sculpted French dragoons for the late 17th, early 18th century. I bought a small pack of them a few weeks ago. They are very nice indeed, so I'm hoping that I'm going to get myself a dismounted regiment and a mounted regiment and base those up. And one of the nice things about that range is that the sculptor and Ebor Miniatures have produced horse holders, so you can have some of the regiment dismounted and some of the regiment holding horses.
Right, and that is the thing that stops people buying dragoons, is that actually you can only use them as cavalry because there aren't enough dismounted figures for you to do anything else with them.
Yeah. And they've got some very nice command figures with drummers drumming on horseback. And
is it 10 drummers drumming?
Any lords are leaping in there? Maids are milking?
I have to get my queen stuff out and start converting those. So hopefully that's going to be on my Christmas
Perfect
list.
for Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely spot on.
Well, on that note, that's really all we've got time for tonight. But we do have time for me, Sidney Roundwood, to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and hope that we can all look forward to a Happy New Year. My thanks to Richard and Nick and everyone here in Drury Lane at the very heart of London's theatre lane.
So yeah, thank you to everybody for coming along. And a very Merry Christmas.
And to round up this very festive event, I'm going to move over to the piano, where I'm going to join Roger Barraclough, hello Roger, and his band, hello band,
alright,
and play you out with our very own festive tribute. Okay Roger, let's take it away.
Tonight's show was recorded before a live audience at the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane. The host was Mr. Sidney Roundwood with guests Nicholas Skinner and Richard Parr. Music by Roger Barraclough and his band.